In August of 2019, DJI shook the FPV world by releasing an HD FPV system that some freaking idiot said was almost impossible and probably would never exist. It needs to be low latency, it needs to be lightweight, it needs to be durable, and it needs to be cheap. The engineering and physical constraints mean that that's basically impossible to achieve. And it seems to me like when DJI released their system, FatShark's response was basically to crap their pants. Because they had been working on a digital FPV system for who knows how long, and it was not ready for release. But they released the Byte Frost system basically to show, hey, we're out here, we're working on this, here is what you can expect from us, but please don't forget that we exist, in the excitement over just how freaking good DJI actually is. That's how I read the release of Byte Frost. But Byte Frost doesn't matter, because it's a year later and Shark Byte is here. And Shark Byte is FatShark's attempt to go back to the drawing board and take all of the things they learned from the release of Byte Frost and improve on them, to take everything they know about DJI's strengths and its weaknesses and try to come up with a product that can, let's just say it, be David to DJI's Goliath. It may seem like DJI is an unstoppable monster, but if the story of David and Goliath tells us anything, it is that the right stone thrown in the right place can make all the difference. And today, we are going to find out whether FatShark has done it. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Well, I thought it was only fair to start the video right off with some flight footage from the Shark Byte system. Because I find it for a lot of people, when they put like the DJI goggles on their face and they go, oh my God, this is so good. I don't know, I want this. Did you have that reaction when you saw that footage? If you've only flown analog, how much better does that feel to you? That gut reaction is going to play a big part in your decision of whether to get this system. But there is a lot more going on here than just the raw image quality. So let's crack open the box and take a look at the Shark Byte system. This is the Shark Byte video transmitter. It has standard 20x20 mounting holes and it's a two-board design, a single MMCX connector for the antenna, and the dimensions are 25 millimeters by 32 millimeters by about 12 millimeters if you need to see if it'll fit in your frame. The Shark Byte video transmitter can be powered from 7 to 26 volts, so basically 2S to 6S, and you're going to need to solder the power wires on here to these small pads. You can just connect it directly to VBAT, though there's no need to connect it to a regulator or anything like that, as long as you're under 6S voltage. In addition to that, you're going to need to solder these TX and RX pads right here to a spare UART on your flight controller. So similar to the DJI system, the Shark Byte system does not support the full Betaflight OSD. Betaflight OSD only works with analog cameras. Instead, the Shark Byte uses the MSP serial protocol to read specific OSD elements from the flight controller and display those elements on screen. It doesn't support all OSD elements, again, like DJI, and you can check the Shark Byte manual for a specific list of which elements are and are not supported. In addition to that, Shark Byte reads the stick positions, and you actually use a special stick command to open a special menu that lets you configure the video transmitter, channel, output power, and so forth, as well as basic settings like Betaflight PIDs and rates. But if you were hoping to get the full Betaflight OSD, you can't do that, at least not today. The video transmitter by itself weighs 10 grams. With the included Runcam camera, it weighs about 15 or 16 grams, and it does not come with an antenna. You'll have to source your own antenna. Remember that when we talk about price. But with a typical antenna, comes in around 22 grams. If we compare that to a Caddx Vista, we get a weight of 26 grams. I do need to say that this is not actually the Caddx Vista. It is the Caddx Nebula Nano. I just don't actually happen to have a spare Vista right now. It's not in a quad. The Vista version would be about 31 grams. It's also worth pointing out that some people are modifying the Vista to remove the heat sinks and make what they call a naked Vista. That is not officially supported, and there is a risk of overheating the unit, but many people are doing it and say that it's fine, and that brings the weight of the Vista down closer to 18 or 20 grams. Although I'm not sure whether that includes the antenna or not. Suffice it to say, the Vista can get a little bit lighter, but the Shark Byte is probably going to be lighter under most conditions. The camera that's included with the kit is the Runcam Nano HD. It is not like the camera that came with the original Frostbite system. That camera was actually an analog camera being fed into the digital Frostbite system. This is a pure digital HD camera, and it has I guess they call it a MIPI connector. It's one of these little connectors that snaps on, and it is a full digital connection all the way through to the video transmitter. Now, this camera may not be the right camera for you. For example, it's 14 millimeters. Maybe you like a micro-sized camera. One of the great things about the Shark Byte system is that FatShark is not restricting who can make cameras for it. Like with DJI, only Caddx is authorized to make cameras, and Runcam made a Vista compatible camera, and DJI and Caddx were like, whoa, don't do that. We're gonna make you bad. FatShark is just like, sure, make cameras. And for example, at this time, I know that Foxeer at least is working on one, and we could probably expect to see, we probably won't see Caddx make one. Probably just Runcam and Foxeer. This is the receiver module for the Shark Byte system, and if you were hoping for a module that fit like in your head tracker bay, no, unfortunately, it is not going to be an internal install. But there is an upside to that if you are using any non-FatShark goggles. More about that in a second. The receiver module connects to FatShark goggles using a modified fan plate, and the system comes with its own modified fan plate that you can install on, well, this is actually the new Attitude V6, which FatShark sent me as part of my Byte Frost system, Shark Byte system, but that hasn't even been announced yet, so I guess get subscribed and hit the notification bell if you want to see the review of the new FatShark Attitude V6 whenever it comes out. But many people will be using a goggle like the HDO2 or the HDO. The fan plate here goes on, and it has this adjustable bracket. I'm currently using it for my Immersion RC LZR Mini. It's the same exact bracket, and the receiver screws onto there and fits on the front of your goggles. And it can kind of wiggle around, but I'm not sure there's really a point to that. The module is powered here via a standard barrel plug, and it comes with an adapter that plugs into the balance lead on your battery. I cut my balance leads off because they get in the way and I don't really use them. If that's you, it also comes with this. It is a power cord with a built-in voltage regulator. You can plug in up to a 4S battery. They say not to use 5S or 6S. It'll just burn out the regulator, and it has two plugs here that can power your goggles and the Shark Byte system. Now we get to one of the biggest appeals of the Shark Byte system over DJI. And that is that it outputs a signal via standard HDMI. This is an HDMI mini connector, and it comes with this little mini HDMI cable that goes to the HDMI input on your goggles. And that will work with any goggle with an HDMI input. It's a 720p 60 signal, so that'll work with FatShark HDOs. It'll work with Eachine EV300O. I've got a review of this up on my channel. It's a pretty freaking good goggle. Check out the review, link in the video description. And it'll work with an Orca, and it'll even work with my freaking screen here. Check it out. Boom. Just like that. Ultimate ground station. The Shark Byte receiver uses quadversity. It has two separate receivers, and each of those receivers has diversity between a built-in patch antenna and a second connector here, which is intended to be used with an Omni antenna, although you could hook it up to 4 patch antennas if you thought there was a particular reason to do that. It is worth pointing out that these Omni antennas are also not included with the receiver, and you will have to either use an existing antenna You don't have to use anything special. You could use any antenna that you use currently with your analog systems if you have some laying around, but you may need to buy additional antennas, and that should be factored into the price of the kit as you're thinking about how much it's going to cost you. Here on the bottom of the module, we've got an SD card slot for DVR recordings. You can only record the goggle feed. There is no built-in DVR or SD card slot on the FatShark VTX itself. And on top, there is a rocker switch here for navigating the menus of the system. Well, speaking of the menus of the system, let's take a look at them. And here we've powered up the Shark Byte system, and it is in its default scanning mode. It is scanning its 8 available channels. And those channels do more or less perfectly coincide with raceband channels, raceband 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. Although, confusingly, like Shark Byte 8 is raceband 6 or something. They're not quite in order, but the frequencies do just about perfectly line up. So if you're trying to intermingle Shark Byte and analog users, there shouldn't be any special considerations. And the other major difference is that the Shark Byte system is receive only. So the situation you get into with DJI, where if you stand too close to a DJI pilot, you get interference from their goggles because the DJI goggles actually transmit as well as receive. That's not going to happen with Shark Byte. You can cluster up with your friends. Well, these days we're all social distancing, so you're not supposed to do that anyway, but there's no issue of getting interference from a Shark Byte system. Well, let's power up a quad, and we should see it pick up the signal right there automatically and lock in on it. And unlike the DJI system, there is no binding. It is very much like an analog broadcast system in that the video transmitter sends its signal out there into the world, and anybody who tunes into that channel with their Shark Byte module, they can just receive the signal. This also means that there is no audience mode like there is with DJI. Anybody who tunes in is going to see the exact same thing that you see, assuming that they're standing in basically the exact same location. You're supposed to be able to get into an on-screen menu using stick commands and adjust all the settings with your controller, and that is not working right now. And the reason it's not working is that the MSP connection between my video transmitter and my flight controller is not working. And I've tried everything I can think of to get it working. And finally, I reached out to FatShark, and they acknowledged that they have had some issues getting that working consistently. It was kind of a big deal. Neither of these video transmitters worked, but fortunately there is a backup method, and this is an opportunity for me to show you that. So the Shark Byte system comes with this control board. I guess its intent is to be used if you don't have a flight controller like on a fixed wing plane, and it plugs directly in to the VTX. And the way this works is you press the button one time to change the channel, you long press it for 3 seconds to change the power. We are on max power. And you also have this little joystick here, which is used to adjust the camera settings. It's going to look real familiar to anybody who has had a Runcam camera before. In fact, it's exactly the same. You've already seen some flight video from the Shark Byte system. Now it's time to do a more rigorous range test compared to DJI, and yes, even analog. The Shark Byte outputs about 500 milliwatts. Actually, that's not 100% true. This one outputs 500 milliwatts, but that's only for this particular batch. They're actually talking about switching to a single board solution that's even smaller and lighter, but only outputs 200 milliwatts for future bundles. The 500 milliwatt VTX will still be available as a separate purchase. We'll talk about pricing a little later in the video. We're not very far down the road here, but you can already start to see some of the breakup. And you can see the way that Shark Byte breaks up is so different from the way that DJI breaks up. It's not a digital style breakup like your satellite TV when the rain comes in. It's more an analog style of breakup. And remember, the latency is not affected. Oh, we haven't talked about the latency yet. Yeah, we'll get to that too. I also want you to notice there's directionality here. These Omni antennas, yeah, they are doing their thing, but if I turn to face back the other way and point these patch antennas at it, the signal gets super clear. Those patch antennas are definitely doing their job. Right here, just before we crest the hill and come out on the top of the road. This is the weakest spot. I don't know if it's because there are trees in the way or whatever, but this is always where it is the hardest to get through. And the signal is really struggling right now. In fact, I'm even seeing some complete dropouts of the image. But again, if I turn my head back, let's just see what I can do to get the best possible signal. Yeah, I can get it pretty manageable. Let's go up the top of the hill and just see how far we can get. So this is just about the highest spot, which still has clear line of sight visibility. Well, line of sight with the terrain. Obviously there's trees in the way, but it has clear line of sight visibility to my place. I can actually see my house. You probably can't see it on the camera. I'm gonna point the goggles straight at my house and see what kind of results I get. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it's completely clear. Once we're up on this hill, it's completely clear. I can even turn like all the way around and have pretty decent signal. Alrighty, now it is DJI's turn. And for the quadcopter, we are going to be using the CADX Vista here in the Gep RC Baby Crocodile. And on the goggles, I want to be really clear that although the Axie HD is installed here, it is not hooked up. We're using the stock DJI antennas. Some people may think that's a little unfair because the Shark Byte has patch antennas built in, and that's exactly right. I'm testing both of these guys in their stock configuration as delivered. You can spend another $60, $70 or something to make the signal a little better with the Axie HD, and the Axie HD will improve the signal a little bit, but we're going to test them in stock condition. That seems the most fair to me. So here we are at the first position, basically the worst position for the test. Let's see how the DJI is doing. We're getting about 2.5 megabits per second, 3 megabits per second, and 1 bar. That's risky. I would consider it risky to fly this. Let's turn our head just a little. Oh yeah. When we turn our head, it comes right back up to between 10 and 15 megabits per second. And gets perfectly good again. Definitely can't see it going in and out. For the record, we are at 50 megabit per second mode because, I mean, that's just how you're going to fly it. Unless you're flying with friends. If you're alone, you're going to be at 50 megabit per second. It's well worth it. And here we are back at the very highest point. And getting about 20 megabits per second, maybe as low as 12. We've seen DJI fly. We've seen it fly all the way out to that ridge and back up here. And if you want to check out my Flywoo Explorer 4-inch long-range flight, you can see just how far you can go on this. It's more a question of how does the image degrade and how well does it hold in than like absolute range. One more thing to do, and that is analog. Let's get an analog DVR in here just for, you know, just cause, why not? For analog, I'm going to be using the iFlight Sedora SL5E. It has the iFlight Force video transmitter in it, which goes up to 800 milliwatts. I think that's a pretty typical high output power for a pretty typical video transmitter. Yeah, I know some video transmitters go up to as much as a watt, but this is what I got. The other thing that I got to figure out is what antenna am I going to use on the goggles? And the antenna that I think I'm going to use is this Immersion RC LZR Mini patch. And that may be a controversial choice because most people don't fly their goggles with dual patches. Most people fly with one patch and one Omni. But here's why I think this is the right decision to make. Number one, the Shark Byte system has 2 patches and 2 Omnis. So if you're trying to compare how does analog at 800 compare to digital or Shark Byte at 500, having patches on the analog goggles is the most fair comparison. And if you are going to use analog instead of either of these 2 digital systems, then you're going to have so much money to spare that you can afford to put the highest gain antennas on there if you really want to and give yourself as much of an advantage as you can. Tell me in the comments why this was a terrible decision. YouTube loves all engagement. All right, here we are at the quote-unquote worst spot. Let's see how she do. Nothing. Oh, that's better. So if I hold my head just right, I can get a stable image that I would say is barely flyable. But if I'm facing the wrong way or anything, nah, nothing. And now the best spot. Oh, there you go. What about the latency of the Shark Byte system? Here's how we measure the latency. We point a GoPro at a light so that the GoPro can see both the light and the screen of the goggle. And then we turn the light on and we measure how many frames it takes in the GoPro between the light turning on and the light turning on in the goggle. So if I go a couple frames ahead, you can see, boom, there the light lit up and now it's fully illuminated. And we measure how long that took. The number of frames distance is the latency of the system from the real world object to you seeing it in the goggles. Now, normally the resolution of this would be quite poor if you were recording at 30 or 60 frames per second, but we are recording at 240 frames per second. And that means 1/240. That means that each frame is 4 milliseconds, which is plenty of resolution for something like this. And the final word is, here is the latency of several different tests. If you count the frames and multiply by 4 milliseconds, you get the actual latency. So here we've got 6 frames, that's 24 milliseconds. Here we've got 3 frames, that's only 12 milliseconds. Here we've got 4 frames, that is 16 milliseconds. Here we have 5 frames, that's 20 milliseconds, 6 frames, 24 milliseconds, and 5 frames, that is 20 milliseconds. Looks like a latency of between about 12 and 25 milliseconds. So, should you buy it? And in order to answer that question, we have to talk about how much it costs. And that is a little more complicated than it might seem. Right now, this kit that you see me using here, the receiver module, this is the 500 milliwatt video transmitter and the Runcam Racer 4 camera, as well as a few other accessories and cables and stuff, but that's the gist of what you get. That costs $250. That is a starter price, and this is still considered beta. This is still not, they are still saying we can make it better. We still want to refine it. $250. Going forward, this receiver, they're estimating it may be about $210-ish. Going forward, this 500 milliwatt video transmitter may be about $90-ish. And the camera, no idea. That's going to be up to Runcam, Fox, or whoever makes the camera. But I guess you could sort of guess. I don't know. These prices, by the way, are not set in stone. But this is the best I could get for a straight answer, at least as of today. Oh, and they already have developed a single board 200 milliwatt video transmitter that has been put on an 85 millimeter whoop. And I don't know about a price for that. That's something that they are probably going to release in the future, but we don't know about that. Worth reminding you, it doesn't come with antennas, so you will need to add your own antennas. Let's say you add another $30 for antennas, and you're still well in under, let's say, $300 in the door. That's way cheaper than DJI. Or is it? Because you still need goggles. You still need goggles, right? Now, the good news is you can use any goggles that you like. You could even use a screen if you're that kind of weirdo. So the goggles could be as cheap as $200 as long as they have an HDMI input, and you're all in for around $500. A more typical person is going to spend closer to $300 on their goggles, and premium goggles are in the $400 to $500 range, not counting an analog module if you needed such a thing. So let's say you're looking at between $600 and $800, depending on which goggles you get, unless you already have goggles, in which case you're in for only $300. And that's a big thing. How compelling Shark Byte is to you is going to depend a lot on whether you already have a set of analog goggles with HDMI input that you really love. Here's another factor you could consider. If you fly a lot of analog quads like Tiny Whoops, FatShark goggles are better for analog than DJI goggles. DJI goggles have large screens, but they're LCD screens. They're not OLED screens, and the latency is a little bit worse on the DJI AV input. Whenever I fly analog quads, I don't use my DJI goggles. I use my HDO2s. If you fly a lot of analogs, you could be leaning more towards the Shark Byte. I think that's kind of the end of the video. At this point, I think I hope you know what you need to know to make a decision as to whether this is right for you. But I got to say, I'm really happy to be able to say that, because some of the earlier units I used, I thought, I just can't see anybody buying this. I can't recommend it personally. Some of the early units, there were either performance or quality issues that I was like, I would just take analog over this and just stick with that. But this is finally at a level where I could see myself flying it. I could see myself replacing all my analog quads with this. It is delivering a better experience enough than analog. It's not just like, oh, it's digital, it's a novelty, it's kind of high def. It really is a better experience in enough ways than analog that it is worth considering. And I can only see it getting, I hope it only gets better from here. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank FatShark for sticking with this and helping fill in many of the gaps that the DJI of the world, not DJIs, the DJI of the world refuses to fill, and giving us this product. If you decide that you want to pick the product up, there's a link in the video description to the Get FPV product page for this kit that you can get. And as time goes on, there will be more listings for individual products, including the new video transmitter and so forth. Thanks so much. It's kind of a weak ending to the, like, usually the video ends and I'm like, yes, either you should buy it and you should not buy it and all is good. But this is a weird one. I know there's people watching who are like, this is what FatShark brings us? Are you joking? And there's other people who are like, yes, it's just everything I hoped it would be. Thank you. And all I gotta hope is that I've given you the information you need to know which one of those you are. Happy flying.
You guys, I don't know where I am, and I don't know what's gonna happen, but if I don't make it out of this, I just want to know that you subscribe to my channel, or maybe join my Patreon, or click one of these videos I picked out for you.